For 4 years, I was the quietest man in the room. In the hyper-polished, cutthroat world of Manhattan's elite, I was known simply as Victoria Sterling's husband, the soft-spoken, low-profile strategic advisor sitting in the shadow of Sterling Global's brilliant, ruthless CEO. To the board, the press, and high society gossips, I was the ultimate trophy of convenience. A gentle, unambitious man living off his wealthy wife's empire. I let them talk. I let them chuckle behind their crystal whiskey glasses at private galas. I didn't care about public prestige, titles, or the intoxicating warmth of the spotlight. I loved Victoria. When she was struggling to keep Sterling Global afloat 4 years ago, I gave up my public presence on Wall Street, tucked away my real life, and dedicated every waking hour to building her dream from behind the scenes. When our overseas supply chains fractured, I quietly fixed them through private phone calls at 3 a.m. When our biggest competitor attempted a hostile takeover, I engineered a counterstructure that saved her company without taking a dime of credit. I was content being her shield, her anchor, and her safe harbor. Until tonight. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was bathed in shimmering chandelier light. Sterling Global's annual Victory Gala was in full swing, celebrating a record-breaking fiscal year. Executives in tailored tuxedos and heiresses in silk gowns sipped vintage champagne. I sat in a quiet corner booth, twirling an untouched glass of sparkling water. A few feet away stood Victoria. She was radiant in an emerald green silk dress, her diamond necklace catching the warm light, her posture radiating absolute authority. Next to her stood Ethan Blake, her 26-year-old senior personal assistant. Ethan was everything the high society crowd adored. Young, sharp, loud, and aggressively ambitious. Over the past year, he had attached his name to every major pitch deck I had secretly drafted for Victoria. He smiled at her with a look that crossed the line between professional admiration and blatant romantic possession. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria's voice echoed smoothly through the high-end microphone, commanding the room's absolute silence. Tonight, we celebrate our greatest year in history. And to honor extraordinary dedication, the board and I are awarding a special annual bonus of $1 million. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Everyone looked toward my corner. Even the cynical board members knew who had worked 90-hour weeks behind closed doors. They knew who had personally renegotiated the European logistics contract that saved the fourth quarter. It was an open secret among the senior staff that I was the brain behind the operations. This year's $1 million bonus, Victoria continued, her clear, decisive gaze sweeping across the room before resting directly on the young man beside her, goes to Ethan Blake. The room quieted for a fraction of a second, caught off guard, before polite applause broke out. Ethan represents the future of Sterling Global, Victoria said, her voice filled with a warmth I hadn't heard in years. He is young, passionate, and isn't afraid to take bold risks for this company. I sat perfectly still. My hand rested lightly on the edge of the mahogany table. I felt no rage, only a cold, hollow sensation expanding in my chest. For 4 years, I had held her hair back when she collapsed from stress-induced migraines. I had sacrificed my own name to build her pedestal. And yet, to her, my quiet sacrifice was just invisible background noise, while Ethan's loud, superficial bravado was passion. Ethan stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted his silk tie, shot a triumphant glance across the ballroom directly at me, and raised his hand. "Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everyone," Ethan began, his tone dripping with practiced charisma. "Receiving this recognition means the world to me. But tonight, I want to make an announcement of my own." He paused, letting the dramatic silence build. "I am declining the $1 million bonus." Gasping rustled through the audience. Victoria turned to him, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan?" she murmured, her voice picked up by the microphone. "What are you doing?" Ethan stepped closer to her, taking the microphone off its stand. His gaze locked onto mine from across the opulent room. "I don't want the money, Victoria," Ethan said clearly, his voice ringing through the speakers. "I don't need a bonus to prove my worth to this company or to you. I want something far more valuable. I want the right to challenge the man sitting in that corner." He pointed a finger directly at me. The entire ballroom turned in unison. Dozens of pairs of eyes, investors, socialites, journalists focused entirely on me sitting alone in my booth. Alec Donovan has spent 4 years riding your coattails. Victoria, Ethan declared, his tone laced with righteous arrogance. He sits back, takes credit for the work of others, and lets a brilliant woman carry the entire weight of an enterprise on her shoulders. He doesn't deserve to stand by your side. Tonight, I am publicly stating my intention to compete for you. I want to prove that Sterling Global and Victoria Sterling deserves a real man who actually pushes her forward, not a quiet leech who holds her back. A stunned silence fell over the Plaza Hotel. This was a public humiliation. A young assistant openly declaring his intent to steal the CEO away from her husband, right in front of New York's upper crust. I looked at Victoria. My heart hammered against my ribs, waiting for the woman I had sworn to protect to shut it down. I waited for her to enforce boundaries, to defend her husband, to put an ambitious employee back in his place. Instead, Victoria looked at Ethan. A faint, admiring smile touched her lips. She didn't pull away. She didn't frown. She took the microphone back gently, looked at Ethan, and said in front of 300 people, "Ethan, I've always admired your courage. I believe in your capability." She didn't deny him. She didn't defend me. She gave his public declaration her implicit, smiling blessing. In that exact second, something inside me broke not with a loud shatter, but with the quiet, final click of a vault door closing forever. I didn't lose to that man, I realized with terrifying clarity as I stared at her emerald dress. I lost to the version of myself that once believed she would never leave. I slowly slid out of the booth and stood up. The crowd parted slightly as I walked down the center aisle toward the stage. Whispers broke out around me. Is he going to fight him? Alec? Please, he's never raised his voice in his life. He's going to beg her not to embarrass him. I stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at my wife. Victoria frowned slightly, her expression instantly shifting from warm admiration for Ethan to cold annoyance toward me. Alec, she whispered sharply, leaning away from the microphone, her eyes full of warning. Don't do this here. Don't make a scene at the company gala. Go back to the car. Go back to the car. Like a obedient dog expected to wait in the dark while its owner entertained guests. I stared into her eyes, the eyes of the woman I had loved more than my own life. I saw no affection, no respect, no gratitude for 4 years of silent devotion. I saw only irritation that I was ruining her moment. Victoria, I said, my voice remarkably calm, echoing quietly in the tense hall. Is this really what you want? Alec, stop being insecure, she said coldly, her tone crisp and dismissive. Ethan is just driven. If you had half his drive, you wouldn't feel so threatened. We will talk about this at home. Sit down. A soft, hollow laugh escaped my throat. It was the first time anyone in that room had ever heard me laugh like that, cold, amused, and devoid of warmth. Before I could speak, Ethan stepped down from the stage. He walked right up to me, pulling a sleek leather folder from inside his tuxedo jacket. Save yourself the remaining dignity, Alec, Ethan whispered in a low voice, audible only to the two of us and Victoria. He thrust the folder against my chest. I had the legal team draft this under Victoria's tacit approval hours ago. It's a formal separation and divorce agreement. If you have an ounce of self-respect as a man, sign it and walk away. I looked down at the dark leather folder in my hands. I opened it slowly. My eyes scanned the legal terms, the asset division lists, and the addresses of the properties Victoria intended to claim. My eyes stopped at one specific line. The marital estate located at 14 Sutton Place, Manhattan. An $80 million penthouse mansion overlooking the East River. Victoria believed it belonged to Sterling Global's corporate trust. She believed she had earned it through her business success over the last 3 years. She had no idea. She didn't know that the private holding firm that sold her that property for a nominal price 4 years ago was a direct subsidiary of Donovan International Me Family's global investment conglomerate. She didn't know that the deed, the land beneath it, and the debt notes securing Sterling Global's corporate headquarters were held entirely in my private name. I gently closed the folder, raised my eyes, and looked at Ethan, then at Victoria. The game of playing the humble, devoted husband was over. I held the leather folder in one hand and looked back and forth between Ethan's smirk and Victoria's cold, impatient eyes. The ballroom was dead quiet. Everyone was waiting for the pathetic, quiet husband to break down, throw a desperate tantrum, or bow his head and walk away in disgrace. Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Victoria and I could hear. Sign it, Alec. You've been living off her hard work for 4 years. Have some pride and let her go. Victoria crossed her arms, her silence giving Ethan all the authorization he needed. Alec, don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said, her tone devoid of emotion. You and I both know this marriage has run its course. Signing that now will save you from an embarrassing legal fight you can't afford. Save me from a fight I can't afford? I asked softly, letting out a short, quiet chuckle. Yes, Ethan sneered, stepping closer. Look at yourself. You're a glorified paper pusher with no network, no capital, and no future outside this company. Once Victoria cuts you off, you have nothing. You're not in our world, Alec. I looked at Ethan. Then I looked at Victoria. You really think he's your future, Victoria? I asked, looking straight into her eyes. You really think this kid is the reason Sterling Global made $90 million in profit this year? Victoria frowned, visibly annoyed by my refusal to step down immediately. Ethan brought energy, vision, and boldness when we needed it most. You offered stability, Alec, but stability doesn't build empires. Ambition does. You two are just from different worlds now. I see, I said. I looked down at the divorce agreement, then tossed the folder onto the cocktail table next to us with a light thud. Alec, sign the damn paper, Ethan snapped, reaching out to tap the folder. Stop stalling. I turned my head slightly and locked eyes with him. The sheer authority in my gaze made him freeze mid-gesture. Ethan, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy baritone that resonated through the front of the room. You worked so hard to steal another man's seat. You gave up $1 million bonus tonight just to play the hero. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray, swirled the golden liquid once, and looked Victoria up and down. If you love secondhand trash that much, I said, staring Ethan right in the eyes, then she's all yours. I'm donating her to you. A collective, sharp gasp echoed across the front rows of the ballroom. Victoria's face drained of color instantly. Her composure shattered. What did you just call me? She hissed, her voice trembling with sudden rage. Alec, how dare you? How dare I? I interrupted, cutting her off with absolute coldness. For 4 years, I stood behind you. I let you take the credit. I let you play the self-made queen, and I kept my mouth shut while you treated me like an accessory you picked up on clearance. But tonight, you stood on that stage and cheered while your assistant publicly disrespected your husband. Alec, you're out of your mind. Ethan snapped, stepping between us, trying to reclaim control. You're just a bitter, broke loser who can't handle being replaced. Replaced? I smirked. Ethan, you didn't replace me. You took over my charity work. Victoria took a step forward, her chest heaving, eyes flashing with embarrassment and fury. You think you can disrespect me in front of my board and walk away fine? You have nothing without me, Alec. That penthouse at Sutton Place. My company pays for it. Your title? I gave it to you. The moment you step out of those doors, you are nobody. Your penthouse? I asked quietly. I pulled my phone from my inner suit pocket, tapped the screen twice, and held it up facing her. Read the land registry record. Victoria, I said. 14. Sutton Place isn't owned by Sterling Global. It's owned by the Donovan Estate Trust. The lease your company signed 4 years ago was a courtesy lease extended to you at a $0 rate. Effective midnight tonight, that lease is terminated for breach of terms. Victoria blinked, staring at the digital document on my screen. What? What are you talking about? That house belongs to my corporate holding group. Your corporate holding group borrowed $40 million from Donovan Capital to purchase the master deed, I replied coldly. And who do you think heads Donovan Capital? Her eyes widened slightly, confusion mixing with an unsettling wave of panic. Donovan, no. That's just a private equity group from London. Your last name is just a coincidence. Is it? I asked. Before she could process the thought, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open heavy and wide. For towering men in tailored black charcoal suits and silver lapel pins walked briskly into the hall. They moved with military precision, pushing past Sterling Global's private event security without stopping. The room grew tense. Guests murmured in confusion as the lead security officer Marcus, former British Special Forces and my family's personal chief of security for a decade, strode directly down the central aisle. Ethan immediately stepped forward, trying to flex his authority in front of Victoria. Hey, Who authorized you guys to enter? This is a private Sterling global event. Security, get these men out. Marcus didn't even look at Ethan. He shoved him aside with a single forearm, sending Ethan stumbling backward into a table of champagne flutes, sending glass crashing to the floor. Hey, Ethan yelled, scrambling to regain his balance, his face flushed red with humiliation. Marcus paid him zero attention. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of me, snapped his feet together, and bowed his head respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Donovan," Marcus said in a crisp, clear British accent that carried across the quiet ballroom. "The executive motorcade is waiting outside. Your flight to the Zurich summit leaves at midnight, and the board of Donovan International is requesting your personal sign-off on the Sterling Global Acquisition proposal." The entire room went completely dead silent. Victoria stood frozen, her hand hovering in the air, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at Marcus, then looked at the silver crest on his lapel, the crest of the Donovan family empire. "Mr. Donovan," she whispered, the words barely coming out of her mouth. I tossed my half-empty champagne glass into the bucket on the nearest table. "Tell the pilots we're leaving in 10 minutes. Marcus," I ordered calmly. "Understood, sir," Marcus replied, stepping back and making way for me. I took one last look at Victoria. The arrogant, dismissive CEO who thought she owned the world was gone. In her place was a confused, terrified woman starting to realize that the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. "Enjoy your new partner, Victoria," I said quietly, leaning in so only she could hear. "And enjoy the rest of your night. Tomorrow morning, Sterling Global gets its first real stress test." I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. Marcus and his men formed a tight escort around me, clearing a path through the stunned crowd of Manhattan's elite. As I reached the grand doors, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. It was an encrypted notification from my chief investment officer. "Donovan International alert. Target Sterling Global hostile takeover plan initialized. 35% short position open. Phase 1 active." I locked my phone, stepped out into the cool New York night, and slid into the back seat of the black Maybach waiting at the curb. The morning after the gala, Sterling Global's emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. Victoria sat at the head of the long marble table in the top-floor boardroom, her eyes bloodshot. She hadn't slept a minute. Across from her, Ethan sat fidgeting with his expensive pen, trying to look composed, though the nervous sweat on his collar betrayed him. "Victoria, what the hell happened last night?" Arthur Vance, the lead independent director, slammed his leather folder onto the table. "Donovan International just filed a Form 13D with the SEC. They hold a massive short position against our stock, and our pre-market price is already down 14%. It's a temporary market reaction," Ethan chimed in quickly, leaning forward. "Alec is just pulling a petty stunt because Victoria served him divorce papers. He's trying to scare us. I've already contacted our primary institutional lenders to bolster our liquidity." "Shut up, Ethan," Vance snapped, rounding on him. "You're an assistant who got promoted yesterday because of office politics. Don't speak when the adults are talking." Ethan's face flushed bright red, but he clamped his mouth shut. Victoria raised her hand, her voice tight. "Arthur, calm down. Alec doesn't have the leverage to bring us down. He's just bluffing. Yes, he somehow has connections to Donovan International, but Sterling Global's foundation is solid. We survived the 2024 supply chain collapse and the offshore liquidity freeze on our own strength." "On our own strength?" Vance let out a bitter, mocking laugh. He pulled a heavy stack of audited financial records from his briefcase and slid them across the table toward Victoria. "Take a look at those, Victoria. Really look at them." Victoria picked up the stack, frowning. "What is this?" "Those are the actual wire trace records from our 3 biggest bailouts over the last 4 years, Vance said coldly. "In 2023, when our European distributor defaulted, a private angel firm named Apex Bridge LLC injected $50 million in capital within 2 hours. In 2025, when our foreign credit line was frozen, Vanguard Pacific bought out our bad debt at 0 interest." Victoria scanned the pages, her fingers beginning to tremble. "I remember. I negotiated those deals with their representatives." "You didn't negotiate anything," Vance cut in ruthlessly. "Look at the ultimate beneficial ownership pages at the back. Apex Bridge, Vanguard Pacific, and 12 other entities that kept this company afloat are all shell companies wholly owned by Donovan Capital, which is managed directly by Alec Donovan. The room went deathly silent. Victoria stared at the black and white documents, her brain refusing to process the reality. Every major crisis she thought she had conquered through her own brilliant leadership. Every landmark triumph she celebrated as proof of her genius. It wasn't her. It was Alec. He had been silently placing massive safety nets beneath her every time she stepped over a cliff. This can't be right, Victoria whispered, her voice cracking. Alec was just a strategic advisor. He spent his days editing my memos and sitting in back office meetings. He was running Wall Street's most formidable shadow fund from your back office. Victoria, Vance yelled, standing up. And while he was protecting your empire, you were letting this kid pointed furiously at Ethan steal his work and insult him in public. Arthur, I didn't know. Victoria stood up, panic finally breaching her cold exterior. He never told me. Why would he? Vance sneered. He loved you enough to let you take the glory. But last night, you handed his wife's title to a nobody. Now he's turned off the life support. Before Victoria could respond, her secretary burst into the boardroom without knocking, holding a tablet. Ms. Sterling, turn on the financial news right now. The secretary gasped. It's live. Vance grabbed the remote and hit the power button on the boardroom's massive screen. The CNBC banner flashed across the display in bold red. Breaking news. The Shadow King of Wall Street reveals his face. The screen showed a packed press conference at the New York Stock Exchange. Dozens of camera flashes were firing like a lightning storm. Standing behind the podium, flanked by the heads of Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and the Federal Reserve Bank president, was Alec. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit, his dark hair styled back, his eyes completely devoid of the soft warmth Victoria had taken for granted for 4 years. He looked every bit like a world dictator of finance. Mr. Donovan, a senior CNBC reporter shouted from the front row. For 10 years, Donovan International operated through silent holdings. Why choose today to step into the public light as chairman and CEO? Alec adjusted the microphone. His voice echoed through the boardroom speakers, clear, deep, and chillingly precise. Because for the past 4 years, I allowed personal affection to cloud my strategic focus, Alec said calmly into the cameras. I stepped back to let someone else build a legacy. Today, that personal distraction is officially concluded. Donovan International is reasserting full control over all domestic assets and restructuring our portfolio. Another reporter yelled out, does that restructuring include Sterling Global? There are rumors of a hostile liquidation. Alec looked directly into the camera lens, staring right through the screen, straight into Victoria's eyes. Sterling Global was a bad investment supported by sentimentality, Alec stated coldly. Effective 9 a.m. Eastern Time, all credit facilities extended to Sterling Global by Donovan Capital have been terminated. We are recalling our loans immediately. In the boardroom, Victoria fell back into her executive chair as if she'd been struck. Her phone began ringing frantically on the table. Then Ethan's phone rang. Then Vance's phone rang. The bank calls were flooding in. Victoria, Ethan stammered, his face pale as paper as he looked at his buzzing phone. The prime brokers, they're calling in our margin loans. They're demanding $200 million in liquidity by noon, or they seize our operating accounts. Victoria didn't answer him. She couldn't hear him. She just stared at the television screen. Alec was stepping away from the podium, surrounded by a heavy security detail, as the world's most powerful financial titans bowed their heads to greet him. For 4 years, she had believed he was a harmless puppy living off her charity. Now, looking at the man dominating the screen, Victoria felt a sudden, suffocating terror. She hadn't just lost a husband. She had personally alienated the sovereign ruler of her entire world. By 2 p.m., Sterling Global's corporate headquarters was in absolute chaos. News of Donovan Capital recalling its loans had leaked to Wall Street, triggering a massive sell-off. The company's stock price was plummeting toward penny stock territory. Inside Victoria's corner office, the air was thick with tension. Fix this, Ethan, Victoria shouted, slamming her hands onto her glass desk. Her hair was messy, and her polished composure had completely evaporated. You told me last night that you had private investors lined up from Silicon Valley. You said you didn't need Alex's background strategy to run this company. Ethan stood across from her, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Victoria, listen to Meth Market is just reacting to the media hype around Alec. My contacts at Westlake Venture Capital promised me a $50 million bridge loan. I just need to email them the restructuring plan I submitted to you last week. Then send it. Victoria yelled. Our trade accounts are frozen. If we can't post collateral by 5 p.m., the European suppliers will seize our inventory at the ports. Ethan hurriedly pulled out his laptop, logged into the company network, and opened his master folder. I'm sending it right now. It's the exact supply chain optimization blueprint I drafted. He stopped dead in his tracks. Victoria frowned, stepping around her desk. What's wrong? Send the file. It's locked, Ethan stammered, his fingers frantically tapping the keyboard. The file path is corrupted. It's asking for an administrator encryption key. What do you mean, an encryption key? Victoria grabbed the laptop, staring at the flashing red prompt on the screen. A notification popped up across the center of the display. Security protocol triggered. Metadata analysis confirms file creator, Alec Donovan. Authorization revoked. Asterisk, asterisk. Victoria felt a cold drop of sweat trickle down her neck. She turned slowly to face Ethan, her eyes narrowing in dark suspicion. Ethan, did you write that restructuring proposal? Of course I did. Ethan panicked, his voice rising pitch by pitch. I just used Alec's old archived notes as a formatting template. That's standard corporate practice. You copied his work, Victoria whispered, the terrifying reality setting in. Every single proposal you brought to my desk over the last year, the European logistics route, the tax mitigation plan, the tech acquisition modelet, was all Alec's? No. Victoria, you have to believe me. Ethan reached out to grab her arm, but she slapped his hand away with a loud strike. You didn't write a single word of it. She screamed. You stole his private files from the home server, slapped your name on the cover page, and presented it to me as your genius. So what if I used his notes? Ethan finally snapped, losing his cool as his authority cracked. He was sitting at home doing nothing anyway. He didn't care about credit. You wanted bold solutions, Victoria, and I gave them to you. What difference does it make whose brain it came from? The difference, a cold voice echoed from the doorway, is that Ethan doesn't know how to execute the plan once the code changes. Victoria and Ethan both whipped their heads toward the entrance. Arthur Vance stood at the door, accompanied by 2 internal audit officers and 2 uniformed police officers from the NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force. Arthur, what is this? Victoria gasped, stepping back. It's an arrest warrant, Victoria, Vance said coldly, pulling a legal document from his jacket. 2 hours ago, Donovan International's legal team filed a formal criminal complaint against Ethan Blake for corporate espionage, grand larceny, and the illegal theft of proprietary trade secrets. Ethan's laptop slipped from his hands, smashing onto the hardwood floor. What? That's insane. I didn't steal anything from Donovan International. I took files from Alec's personal drive. Alec Donovan is Donovan International, Vance replied ruthlessly. Every document you copied from his private server was patented and copyrighted under Donovan International's intellectual property vault. You didn't just steal from your boss's husband, Ethan. You stole federal trade secrets from a defense-tier financial institution. The 2 police officers stepped forward. Ethan Blake, you have the right to remain silent, the lead officer said, grabbing Ethan's wrists and pulling them behind his back to snap on heavy steel handcuffs. Victoria, help me. Ethan screamed, struggling against the officer's grip as he was dragged toward the door. Tell them it was for the company. Victoria, you signed off on those proposals. You approved them. Get him out of my sight, Victoria whispered, her voice hollow. She couldn't even look at him. As the police dragged a sobbing, hysterically screaming Ethan down the hallway past dozens of whispering employees, Victoria slumped into her chair. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She grabbed her personal cell phone with trembling fingers and dialed Alec's private number, the number she used to call whenever she needed him to bring her lunch or pick up her dry cleaning. She expected it to go straight to voicemail or be disconnected. Instead, after 4 long rings, the line picked up. Alec. Victoria sobbed into the phone, dropping all her corporate pride. Alec, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't know Ethan was stealing your work. I was blind, Alec. Please. You have to help me. The banks are shutting down our accounts, and the police just took Ethan away. I know. Alex's voice came through the speaker, as calm and steady as a quiet ocean. I authorized the arrest warrant 20 minutes ago. Alec, please. She cried out, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Sterling Global is my life. You built this company with me. You protected it for 4 years. You can't just destroy it out of anger toward me. Victoria, Alex said softly, his tone completely devoid of anger or warmth. It was the tone of a stranger reading a weather report. I didn't destroy Sterling Global. You did the moment you traded 4 years of loyalty for an assistant's cheap flattery. I was wrong. She wept into the receiver. I was an idiot. I put my pride first, and I took you for granted. Just come home, Alec. Come back to Sutton Place. We can fix this. We can start over. Sutton Place was put up for public auction an hour ago. Alec interrupted smoothly. And as for starting over, we have nothing to start over, Victoria. We are officially over. Alec, don't do this to me. She begged, clutching the phone with both hands. I love you. I realize it now. I love you. No, Victoria, Alec replied coldly. You don't love me. You love the safety net I provided. And that net is gone. The line went dead with a soft click. Victoria pulled the phone from her ear, staring at the black screen. She dropped the phone onto the desk, buried her face in her hands, and let out a broken, hopeless sob into the empty, silent office. The emergency shareholder assembly of Sterling Global was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the grand auditorium on the 3rd floor. It wasn't a meeting, it was a slaughterhouse. Major institutional investors, minority shareholders, and board members packed the rows, shouting over one another as trading of Sterling Global's stock remained halted. Victoria sat at the center of the main stage behind a long wooden panel, flanked by Arthur Vance and the corporate legal team. She wore a simple dark suit, her eyes bruised with exhaustion, trying to maintain a posture of control she no longer felt. Order. I call this meeting to order. Vance pounded the gavel against the block 3 times. The room settled into a bitter, hostile silence. We are here to vote on a motion of emergency receivership and the immediate removal of Victoria Sterling as Chief Executive Officer. A heavy wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Victoria leaned toward her microphone. Her voice was strained, but clear. Before you cast your votes, I ask you to consider the facts. Our core operational assets remain functional. The disruption we are facing is an artificial liquidity squeeze manufactured by Donovan Capital. If we approve a restructuring debt deal with our secondary lenders. With what secondary lenders, Victoria? A major hedge fund representative yelled from the 3rd row, standing up. Every prime brokerage in New York blacklisted US 3 hours ago. No one is touching our debt because no one wants to cross Alec Donovan. He's right. Another investor chimed in. You pushed out the man who was silently backing our balance sheet for half a decade to promote a criminal fraud. You ruined this company's credit rating in less than 24 hours. I am trying to save this company. Victoria shouted back, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the podium. If you vote to oust me today, Sterling Global goes straight into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You will all lose your equity. They won't lose a dime. A deep, commanding voice resounded from the back of the auditorium. The heavy double doors swept open. Alec walked down the center aisle, flanked by Marcus and a team of top-tier corporate attorneys from Skadden ARPs. He didn't look angry. He looked like an emperor inspecting a conquered province. The crowd parted automatically, stunned into total silence as the Wall Street legend walked toward the stage. Victoria stood frozen behind her microphone, her breath catching in her throat. Alec. Alec didn't look at her. He stepped up the side stairs onto the main stage, walked straight to the podium, and placed a thick leather binder on the wood. Mr. Donovan, Vance said, his tone instantly shifting from hostile to deeply respectful. To what do we owe the honor? You hold no direct board seat at Sterling Global. I hold 68% of your outstanding senior debt, Alec replied calmly, his voice projecting effortlessly through the room. And as of 20 minutes ago, Donovan International executed its conversion rights. I am now the majority equity holder of Sterling Global. Gasps erupted across the auditorium. Board members exchanged panicked glances. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. You bought out our senior debt pool? That cost over $400 million. It was a bargain, Alex said smoothly, turning his head slightly to look at her for the first time. His eyes were cold, distant, and completely indifferent. I bought it at a 40% discount because your creditors were terrified of holding toxic assets managed by you. Victoria felt a sharp pain in her chest. Alec, please, don't do this here. Let's talk in private. There is nothing left to talk about in private. Victoria, Alec cut her off cleanly, turning back to the assembly. I am here to announce a complete corporate restructuring. Effective immediately, Sterling Global is acquiring its primary market rival, Vanguard Enterprise, in an all-stock transaction. The auditorium went dead quiet for 2 seconds before exploding into wild chatter. Vanguard Enterprise? Vance gasped, his eyes wide. They've been squeezing our market share in Europe for 2 years. If we merge with Vanguard, our market valuation doubles overnight. Why are you doing this, Mr. Donovan? The hedge fund representative asked, stepping forward in shock. Yesterday you pulled our credit lines. Today you're saving the company? Alex stood tall, resting his hands casually on the edges of the podium. I am not saving Sterling Global for Victoria, Alex said, his baritone voice echoing through the speakers. I am protecting the assets I built. I refuse to let 4 years of my hard work be destroyed simply because the woman I assigned to oversee it lacked the vision to appreciate its value. Every word felt like a physical blow to Victoria's chest. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she bit her lower lip, refusing to let them fall in front of her board. She stepped toward him, her voice trembling softly. Alec, you still care. You wouldn't step in and do this if you didn't still feel something for me, for what we had. Alec turned to face her fully. The entire room watched in breathless silence as the titan of Wall Street looked at his former wife. I helped build this empire because I once loved you. Victoria, Alex said quietly, his tone devoid of any lingering tenderness. I did it out of respect for the promise I made when I married you. But do not confuse my respect for my own legacy with affection for you. I am fixing this company because it belongs to me, not to you. Victoria swallowed hard, her voice breaking. Then, what happens to me? Alex signaled to his legal team behind him. His chief attorney stepped forward and handed a single-page document to Victoria. As majority shareholder, Alec announced, looking back at the crowd, I have voted to dissolve the current executive board. Victoria Sterling is officially relieved of her duties as CEO of Sterling Global. Victoria dropped the paper onto the desk, her hands shaking violently. You're firing me? From the company that bears my family's name? Your family name remains on the building, Alec replied coldly. Your presence in it ends today? Alec, please. Victoria cried out, completely shattering her public persona, taking a step toward him. Don't take this away from me. It's all I have left. You had a husband who loved you more than life itself, Alex said, stepping back from her, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. You threw him away for applause from a room full of strangers and a cheap assistant. You chose this, Victoria. He turned away from her and looked at the board members sitting in the front row. I am appointing Sarah Lynn, former COO of Donovan Capital, as the new chief executive officer of the merged entity, Alec declared into the microphone. She takes control of operations effective immediately. The board members immediately stood up, applauding enthusiastically, eager to curry favor with the new, undisputed master of the enterprise. The very people who had smiled in Victoria's face for years completely turned their backs on her, crowding around Alec to offer their congratulations. Victoria stood alone on the edge of the stage, surrounded by applause that was no longer for her, watching the man she had looked down upon control the entire world with a single sentence. She had kept her company, but she had lost her soul. And Alec Donovan was already walking out the door without looking back. 48 hours after her public removal from Sterling Global, Victoria sat on a bench outside the Southern District of New York Federal Courthouse. She was dressed in a plain coat, without her usual entourage of assistants or public relations managers. Her lawyer, a senior partner she had to pay out of her personal savings, stepped outside and handed her a takeaway coffee cup. Ethan's legal team tried to pitch a plea bargain this morning, the lawyer said, sitting down beside her. They offered to testify against you, claiming you authorized his corporate espionage against Donovan International. Victoria took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, her face expressionless. Did the prosecutors take it? The prosecutors didn't even get a chance to consider it, the lawyer replied with a dry, bitter laugh. Alec's legal firm stepped in. They submitted ironclad digital forensic evidence showing Ethan acted entirely on his own, hacking into Alec's private drives and forging your signature on internal approvals. Victoria blinked, looking up in faint surprise. Alec proved my innocence? Don't get your hopes up. Victoria, her lawyer said bluntly, turning to look at her. He didn't do it to save you. His head counsel made it very clear to the district attorney Alec didn't want Ethan using you as a scapegoat because he wanted Ethan to take the full, unmitigated hit of a federal conviction. Ethan is looking at 15 years in a maximum security federal prison. Before Victoria could answer, the courthouse doors swung open. Ethan was let out in orange prison scrubs, heavy wrist chains, and leg shackles, escorted by 4 federal marshals. His hair was messy, his eyes were bloodshot, and all the arrogant swagger from the gala 2 nights ago had completely vanished. When he caught sight of Victoria, Ethan stopped, his chains rattling loudly. "Victoria!" he screamed, his voice breaking into a desperate sob. "Victoria, please. Talk to Alec. Tell him to drop the private civil suit. He's suing me for $50 million in damages. I don't have that kind of money. They're going to ruin my life." Victoria slowly stood up from the bench. She walked toward the police barricade, stopping a few feet away from the young man who had ruined her life. "Victoria, please." Ethan wept, leaning against the metal fence, his hands trembling in the steel cuffs. "I did it for us. I wanted to show you I could be the man you deserved. I wanted to give you everything Alec couldn't." "For us?" Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet and empty. "You stole his work, Ethan. You lied to my face, lied to the board, and set my company on fire just to feed your own pathetic ego. I loved you." Ethan cried out. "I gave up $1 million bonus for you at that party." "You didn't give up anything," Victoria said, her eyes cold as ice. "You rejected $1 million because you thought you were going to take over a multi-billion-dollar company by standing next to me. You were never in love with me, Ethan. You were in love with my title. And what about you?" Ethan snapped back, his fear suddenly turning into bitter, ugly rage. "You took his work too. You enjoyed the success. You sat on your high horse for 4 years treating Alec like garbage while enjoying every single penny he earned for you. You're just as guilty as I am." Victoria froze. The harsh truth of Ethan's words hit her harder than any legal sentence could. She didn't argue. She couldn't. "You're right," she whispered softly. "I was just as blind. But unlike you, Ethan, I lost the only person who actually cared about me." "Take him away," the federal marshal ordered, grabbing Ethan by his orange sleeve and hauling him down the concrete steps toward the armored transport van. "Victoria, help me. Victoria." Ethan screamed hysterically as the van doors slammed shut, cutting off his cries into dead silence. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, watching the black van drive away into New York traffic. She felt completely numb. Her phone chimed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, hoping against all logic that it was a message from Alec. It wasn't. It was an automated legal notification from New York County Real Estate Registry. Property transfer notice. The residential property located at 14 Sutton Place, New York, has been officially listed for public auction by Donovan Estate Trust. Opening bid, $80,000,000, asterisk asterisk. Attached to the notification was a brief personal note from Alec's estate manager. Asterisk Ms. Sterling, Mr. Donovan has authorized a 24-hour window for you to remove your personal belongings from 14 Sutton Place. After 5 p.m. tomorrow, the locks will be changed, and all remaining items will be liquidated, asterisk. Victoria clutched the phone to her chest, her knees giving out slightly. She remembered the day they moved into that penthouse 4 years ago. Alec had carried her through the front door, laughing, telling her that no matter how stressful her corporate battles became, that house would always be her sanctuary. She had assumed the house was hers because of her status. She had assumed his love was permanent. Now, standing alone in the middle of Manhattan, surrounded by skyscrapers and busy commuters who didn't care who she was, Victoria realized the terrifying depth of her reality. Ethan was going to prison. Her company belonged to someone else. Her home was on the auction block, and Alec was standing at the top of the world, completely beyond her reach. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Manhattan was packed with world leaders, Wall Street titans, and international press for the annual Global Business Summit. Alex stood near the center of the executive lounge, wearing a bespoke midnight blue tux, sipping sparkling water as he conversed with the CEO of JP Morgan and the European Central Bank president. He was relaxed, commanding, and totally in his element. The restructuring of Vanguard and Sterling Global was brilliant, Alec, the JP Morgan CEO said, tapping his glass against Alex. You turned a volatile situation into a market monopoly in less than 72 hours. It was just efficient management, Alec replied with a smooth, effortless smile. When you remove dead weight from an operation, growth happens naturally. A sudden hush rippled through the security perimeter near the velvet ropes. Victoria stepped through the entrance. She didn't have an invitation. She had used the last remnant of her social capital and her former CEO credential to slip past the outer security desk. She looked pale, her hair tied back simply, wearing a plain black dress devoid of any designer jewelry. The socialites and executives nearby immediately began to whisper, pointing at her with pity and contempt. Is that Victoria Sterling? Former CEO, you mean? I heard she lost her entire empire in a single board vote. Look at her. She actually showed up here looking for him. Victoria ignored the stares, her gaze fixed entirely on Alec. She took a deep breath and walked straight toward him, stopping just outside his circle. Marcus immediately stepped into her path, his broad shoulder blocking her way. Ms. Sterling, you don't have security clearance for the executive lounge. Marcus, please, Victoria pleaded, her voice cracking softly. Just 5 minutes. Please. I just need to speak with him. Alec raised a hand slightly. Marcus instantly stood down, stepping aside. Alec turned, stepping away from the international dignitaries, and looked at Victoria. His expression was as smooth and unreadable as marble. You shouldn't be here, Victoria, Alec said calmly. This event is for active heads of enterprise. Alec, Victoria said, stepping closer, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. I went back to Sutton Place this morning to pack my things. I saw the photo frame on your desk, the one from our anniversary in Paris 4 years ago. Alec didn't flinch. I told the movers to clear out the entire office. They must have missed it. You didn't throw it away, she whispered desperately, reaching out a hand, though she didn't dare touch his sleeve. Alec, I know I ruined everything. I know I was arrogant, blind, and foolish. I treated your love like something I owned instead of something I had to earn. But please, tell me there is still a piece of you that remembers who we were. Alec looked into her eyes, his voice steady and devoid of anger. I remember exactly who we were, Victoria. I was a man who believed in you, and you were a woman who thought I was replaceable. I don't think that anymore. She cried out softly, aware of the crowd watching them from a distance. I see everything now. I know you built my entire life. I don't care about the CEO title, Alec. I don't care about Sterling Global or the money. I just want my husband back. Give me one chance. Let me earn you back. A heavy silence stretched between them. Alex slowly pulled a silver pen from his inner jacket pocket and signed a document presented to him by his assistant, passing it back before looking back at Victoria. Victoria, Alex said softly, his voice cutting through her desperate hopes like a surgical blade. I gave you hundreds of chances. Every night for 4 years when I sat at home waiting for you to ask me how my day was. Every time you walked past me to take a phone call. Every time you chose the applause of the board over me. I gave you chances every single day. You just never noticed because you were looking over my head. Victoria swallowed hard, a single tear escaping down her cheek. I'm begging you, Alec. Begging doesn't rewrite history, Alec said calmly. I don't hate you, Victoria. I truly don't. But the man who loved you died the moment you cheered for another man on that stage. Before Victoria could speak, a poised, elegant woman in an ivory evening gown walked up beside Alec. It was Eleanor Vance, the brilliant venture capitalist and heiress to the Vance European Trust. Alec, the Prime Minister is waiting for us at the head table, Eleanor said smoothly, sliding her arm comfortably through Alec's arm. She glanced at Victoria with polite, cold indifference, then looked up at Alec with genuine respect. Are we ready? Yes, Eleanor. Let's go, Alec replied. He didn't offer Victoria another word. He didn't offer her a final look. Alec turned his back on her and walked toward the head table flanked by world leaders, leaving Victoria standing entirely alone in the center of the grand room, surrounded by people who were already looking away. 6 months later, the Manhattan winter had settled in hard. Inside the glass executive suite of Donovan International on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center, Alex stood looking out over the snow-covered skyline. His phone rang on the desk behind him, a direct line from his chief legal officer. Alec picked it up. Go ahead. The final liquidation of Sterling Global's old assets is complete, Mr. Donovan, his lawyer reported. The brand has been completely folded into Vanguard. And as for Victoria Sterling, her personal bankruptcy filings were finalized this morning. She's officially moved out of New York. Where did she go? Alec asked, his tone dry and neutral. Upstate, a small town near Rochester. She's working as an entry-level compliance consultant for a local firm. No press, no status, no high society connection. The lawyer paused slightly. She didn't contest a single asset division clause in the final decree. She signed everything without asking for a dime. Understood, Alex said smoothly. Close the case files. Yes, Mr. Donovan. Alec hung up the phone, stepped away from his desk, and walked toward the private elevator. Downstairs, a motorcade was waiting to take him to the Federal Reserve Summit. Meanwhile, in a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop 300 miles north of Wall Street, Victoria sat at a small wooden corner table. She wore a simple wool sweater, her hair pulled back into a plain ponytail. On the table in front of her sat a laptop displaying financial reports for a regional logistics companion job that paid less in a year than what she used to spend on a single evening dress. Beside her laptop lay a worn leather notebook. She opened it to the first page. It was an old handwritten strategy outline for Sterling Global's first expansion project from 5 years ago. On the bottom corner, written in neat, calm handwriting, was a small note. Asterisk for Victoria Me Hart and my CEO. Build your dream. I'll hold the foundation. Hey, asterisk. Victoria ran her fingers over the faded blue ink. The door to the coffee shop chimed as a customer walked in holding a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal. He set it down on the counter while waiting for his order. The front page banner was impossible to miss. Donovan International closes historic $120 billion global merger. Alec Donovan named Financial Leader of the Decade. Asterisk, asterisk. Victoria stared at the sharp, commanding photograph of her ex-husband on the front cover. He was smiling comfortably alongside international leaders, radiating the absolute authority of a man who owned the world. A young colleague from her new office walked over, holding 2 paper cups, and sat across from her. Crazy, right? The coworker remarked, pointing at the newspaper headline on the counter. Alec Donovan. 5 years ago, nobody even knew his name. Now he basically controls the global market. Imagine being the person who let a guy like that slip away. Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing a small, hollow smile. Yeah, imagine. I heard his ex-wife used to run a company in New York, the coworker continued, taking a sip of coffee. She had the richest, most loyal guy on earth backing her up, and she threw it all away for some junior assistant who ended up in federal prison. What kind of person trades a king for trash? Victoria looked down at her hands that no longer wore a wedding ring or expensive diamonds. A person who took the sun for granted, Victoria said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought the light belonged to her, instead of the man holding the candle. The coworker looked at her, confused. What? Nothing, Victoria replied, closing her leather notebook and sliding it into her bag. Just thinking. She looked back out the window at the falling snow. In the past, whenever she was stressed, Alec would have been there with a hot drink, taking her coat, quietly handling every problem before she even had to ask. She had thought his devotion was weakness. She had thought his patience was helplessness. Now she finally understood. Alec Donovan had never needed her. He had never needed her title, her family money, or her corporate status. He had stayed by her side for 4 years simply because he loved her. And she had traded the most powerful man in the world for a liar's applause. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was an email from her supervisor asking for a routine spreadsheet update. Victoria picked up her pen, opened her laptop, and went back to work. There were no grand galas waiting for her tonight. No executive drivers, no champagne toasts, and no Alec to catch her when she fell. She had her freedom, but she had lost the entire world. Back in Manhattan, Alex Maybach pulled up to the front entrance of the St. Regis. Marcus opened the door, holding an umbrella over Alec as he stepped out onto the red carpet. Reporters and photographers surged against the velvet ropes, flashing light filling the snow-filled air. Mr. Donovan, one question. A reporter shouted over the noise. Do you have any regrets about how the Sterling global liquidation went down? Alex stopped for a brief second on the top step. He looked back at the city lights reflecting off the Hudson River. No regrets, Alex said calmly into the microphone closest to him. Life doesn't offer rewinds. When people show you who they are, you believe them, and you move forward. He turned, walked through the glass doors into the warm, golden light of the grand lobby, and stepped into his future unbroken, unstoppable, and completely free.